Welcome to Teachers Talking Teaching, where we celebrate and elevate the art of teaching.
I'm really excited to have one of my favorite guests on our show. My co-host, Tracey Bean, is continuing our series to talk about intermediate literacy and particularly how she approaches teaching reading with her fifth grade students. So welcome, Tracey.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us about how you approach teaching upper elementary students in literacy. And one of the things that I wanted you to start by just talking with us about is what's most important in the upper elementary grades when it comes to teaching literacy.
Yeah, I think it was great having Amy on and talking about like the importance of phonemic and awareness, and I mean truly getting kids to be readers. Our best hope always is by the time they get to fifth grade, they are readers, or what I like to fondly call word callers. At least, they can decode the words on the page. Whether they can fully be fluent is sometimes maybe a question, and something that we continue to work on in fifth grade. But I would say, when you're talking about the science of reading, that comprehension piece and the vocab understanding, that's kind of where we hope to elevate them in fifth grade and increase their skills. Especially because fifth grade in most school districts, they're headed off to middle school and then of course high school. And so we need to create independent readers at that point. And because we know what's going to be asked of them in both middle school and high school is going to be interacting with a book one-on-one and interacting with, I would say paper, but that's what we did when I was in school when we wrote, interacting with their computer to do, writing their essays and writing everything that they need down the road. So, that comprehension piece is huge for me to help them build some independence to set them up for future success. So, but yeah.
As students start to get older, the role of the read aloud in the intermediate classroom changes a little bit. So can you talk about how you choose, how you do a read aloud and how you choose books for a read aloud?
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of my school day, and it's a piece I'm unwilling to give up no matter how time crunched I feel. Because I think what we also know is fifth grade can also be a make or break year for the love of reading. And we can sometimes pick apart, if we're asking them to read a novel, we can pick it up. We as teachers are really good about making kids slow down and pick it apart a chapter at a time. And so giving them an opportunity just to interact with literature in a way that they love it. And for me, that's especially a passion, is to help them try to foster that love of reading. And so I think read aloud is a huge piece of that. So just one time a day where they just get to sit back and enjoy reading, and nobody's going to ask them questions. Nobody's going to ask them to provide evidence for why they think that's the theme or why the character acted that way, or they're just simply going to enjoy. And so I also rely on other podcasts and bloggers that I listen to increase my library. And then for every book I read, definitely there are some that are like, okay, these are going to go on the shelf, and then these are actually going to be on my read aloud potential list. For example, for fifth grade, I always, for the last 4 years, have started with Restart, because it's a great social emotional kind of connection to that idea of Restart by Gordon Corman covers bullying and boy who wakes up and has amnesia. And he was the school bully, and he's forgotten that. So is he going to be a different person now? So that book is one of my have-tos for many reasons. Read to fifth graders. This year, though, I've tried out a new thing called First Chapter Fridays. It's a new thing for me, and I did not invent this. But so every Friday, I pick a book and I read at least a portion of the first chapter of the book, and I try to find ones that are either go along with our science or social studies topic, or just ones that I know are going to fly off the shelf. And
is it like a little hook, like you're trying to hook that independent reading?
And it works amazing. And then of course, elementary teachers, we all have the popsicle sticks of everybody's name. So after I read it, I'll pull a popsicle stick, and I tell the kids, like, if I pull yours, you get the book first, but you can pass. Like, you might be reading a book already, or maybe you heard it and you're like, that's not my kind of book. And so far I have yet to not have a First Chapter Friday book, like first kid that gets pulled, you'd think they won the lottery. And I'm like, I'm handing them a book. Like, don't tell them. Like, they didn't win any money or anything. They just won a book. And so far, every kid has taken it. And then the kids are like flocking to that person to like, will you make a list? And can I be next? I want the book next.
Oh,
and,
that's awesome.
You know, it's really great if I every so often happen to have 2 copies or 3. But for the most part, I usually have 1.
Yeah.
So like one of the first weeks I did The First Cat in Space Ate Pizza, which was a graphic novel. And it's a new graphic novel. And of course, graphic novel and Mrs. Bean read this, you know, and got us hooked on it. And so that one flew into the hands of the kids. So that's something new I'm trying this year to get them to choose a book.
And that'll continue to grow that, keep them loving reading as they move on into middle school.
Yeah.
When you think about the independent reading that you're asking them to do, what kinds of things do you use to connect them to their independent reading?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I read some of the work of Beers and Probst, and I read the Notice and Note books. They have a Notice and Note for fiction, Notice and Note for nonfiction. And then after they wrote those 2, they had another book called Disrupting Thinking, which uses the concepts of, they call it BHH reading, book, head, heart reading. And that really resonated with me because, especially the heart piece, because I think what we do as teachers really good is we help the kids understand what was in the book. And the head piece we do pretty well too, because we're a lot about these are the questions we're going to ask and the answers right there versus head questions or books I actually had, or questions I had to think about before I came up with an answer. The heart, though, is like, I mean, that's what hooked me on reading, was a book that moved me. And sometimes moved me to hate it. Like, I still, as an adult, will read a book and I'm like, ugh, that was not a great book. And but we know that reading needs to connect with you on an emotional level. And so trying to help kids, trying to help especially 5th graders, because they're ready for that conversation. Like, they're ready to take it to the next level. And they can understand when you say, like, a book should make you have an emotion. Like, they're like, oh, yeah, I can think about that. And so that BHH reading is a huge piece of what we do. We have the kids write book reviews, and it's based on that. They write a paragraph about what was in the book, like a traditional summary, more like a somebody wanted but so kind of sentence. That's, you know, here's a quick summary sentence of what the book is. And then the book paragraph that they write for their book review is, what did I learn from the book? What changed, challenged, or confirmed my thinking is Beers and Probst's big question that we really focus on. And then the heart paragraph, I think, is always the hardest for them because it's easy for them to say it made me feel sad or it made me feel happy, but to help them go beyond that, because the heart also is, how did I become a better person because I read this book? Or what did I learn from this book that I'm going to take after I put this book back on the shelf? Like, what's going to still resonate with me after that? And again, I love teaching 5th grade because they're ready to start to tackle that. It's a coaching process and it's a modeling process to help them understand what you kind of want in that kind of a paragraph. But they're ready to start to think a little deeper.
And providing them with the books that have a really strong heart component is important, so that you're getting that deeper thinking, that kind of complicated process of you know, checking your emotions and how they're corresponding to what's going on in the book.
And that you can do it with a picture book. You can do it with a nonfiction book. You can do it with obviously novels. You can do it with articles. Like, any of that is perfectly relevant. That's usually how we start the year. In fact, that's what I've just finished teaching. We're now in the middle of teaching them the signposts from the nonfiction, from Beers and Probst's nonfiction book. And so we start with nonfiction because our first science unit is space. So we read a lot of books about space that connect with that, and read, you know, lots of true facts and things. And so Beers and Probst, there's 5 signposts that we teach the kids to look for. There's things like extreme and absolute language. So when a character tries to claim that this is, you know, the largest galaxy in the solar system or something like that. And then we teach the kids, we teach them that word skeptical, talk about, you know, a good vocab word for them to learn to become skeptical readers. And that when an author uses that extreme or absolute language, it doesn't mean it's not true. It could be true, but it doesn't mean you're not skeptical in the process to go, wait, they're sharing information with me, and does that actually, you know, does that actually jive? And there's another one of their signposts is contrast and contradictions. And that's, you know, there's a lot of ways that an author can use contrast and contradictions. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing 2 viewpoints in one article. Other ways they can do it is by sharing information that, again, the reader goes, hang on, I thought the world worked this way. This is my understanding. Or maybe even just in America, this is what school looks like in America. And we're reading an article about school in other countries. And this, is causing my brain to grow because I'm having to rethink what I thought I understood. And then, of course, numbers and stats, teaching them to be skeptical of, when an author shares some sort of numbers, we shouldn't necessarily just believe, because we all know statistics can be skewed a little. So I love that the Beers and Probst signposts, all 5 of them, allow the kids to, there isn't a signpost you're looking for. There's not a right or wrong answer when they're reading. There isn't a perfect number or stats to pick and analyze. The kids have a graphic organizer that has all 5 signposts on it, and whatever contrasts and contradicts in your mind is legitimate to write down on your graphic organizer. And then we use that to actually have their small group discussions. And one of the kids is the director of the group, and they have people share their signposts, and they make connections among each others, and or we'll share like, oh, I hadn't thought of that one, And I just love that their signpost work is so open-ended, and it allows the kids to bring themselves to what they're reading, and it can also apply to everything we're reading. So I'm not having to reteach a whole new graphic organizer, a whole new way of thinking, or every time we read an article, I can just pull out the same graphic organizer, and they're looking for the same things, and they get so used to it. Later in the year, there's inevitably somebody will be reading something independent, and will say, I found I found an extreme or absolute language. And I'm like, I didn't even tell you to do that.
And I think what do you think about like what you were preparing them to do as adults? Like being a critical consumer of information is super important, media literacy, discipline literacy, all of those aspects, like having the tools and the language to look at text as a critical consumer, particularly when it comes to a nonfiction text. Like, what a great skill that will continue to just feed them forward as they go through middle school, high school, and on into college or the workforce.
Absolutely.
That they need that type of language to approach text.
Yeah, and there's still, like, that's the great thing about the fiction signposts. They get in, there's also contrasts and contradictions in that, but otherwise there's different things the kids are looking for. They could be looking for words of the wiser in a fiction book, where a character bestows their knowledge upon the other characters. So there's 6 signposts for the fiction, equally open-ended. But the great thing too about the fiction ones is they still, and Beers and Probst have done this work, and a lot of other teachers have shared like how they make that leap from, well, words of the wiser really leads you to the theme, because usually the word, the smart character, the Dumbledore character in Harry Potter, who's sharing his words of the wiser, is really telling you what's the lesson, what do we really want all kids to take away from reading Harry Potter books. So it's not that you're not still teaching all those literary elements you need to teach. It's just that you're teaching kids to look for the signs of them, as opposed to reading the whole book and then expecting them to somehow miraculously have picked out the theme while they were reading it, and while hopefully they were enjoying it at the same time. So it's still getting at word gaps. Or in the nonfiction side, we're still doing vocab. Like, what are the words that you think the author shared, but for you it was, I've never heard this word before. For me, this was a gap in my understanding, and I needed to go back and fill that gap as I was reading. So I love the open-endedness of it, and yet I love that we're still teaching all the things that I still have standards. Still have things I'm expected to get them to understand about.
But it's a way of getting to the standards. That's awesome.
Exactly. That allows them to also bring their creativity and independence through, to look at it from their own lens. There is no longer, here's the answer Mrs. Bean's looking for, and just regurgitate that for me, and then we'll move on to the next novel. So
Well, thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much for sharing your approach to teaching intermediate literacy. It's great to have your wisdom.
If you liked what you heard today, go to our Facebook page and like and subscribe. You can also go to YouTube and join our YouTube channel, as well as listen to us on your favorite podcasting app.